Hello everyone, I'm here with my friend Paddy. Sometimes people say dogs look a bit like their owners. Well, I chose Paddy as a pup when he was 6 weeks old. You can probably guess why. Look, if you look under here, look, it's like a vicar wearing a dog collar. He's a faithful friend, 10 years old. He's been through it all with us. The birth of the two youngest children and a few house moves and everything else in between. As you can imagine, choosing a name for pets in this house is a bit complicated. A lot of names are already taken. But we called this one Paddy because of his massive feet when he was a pup. They're still quite big now, aren't they, Dog? Hey? Yes, they are. Oh, you've had enough. Off you go. Well, one name that we haven't called any of our animals, and one name I've never come across in a baptism, is Judas. No one brings you their baby and say, we're going to call this one Judas, Vicar. Judas gets a bit of a bad press, doesn't he? Well, tonight I want to think a little bit about Judas, and I want us to turn to the chapter in John's Gospel that deals with Judas, John chapter 22. We've been looking at these resurrection appearances of Jesus in John chapter 20 and John chapter 21, so let's turn to John chapter 22 and see how Jesus deals with Judas. Oh, I'm really sorry. There is no John chapter 22. We don't have a John chapter 22 because Judas, after betraying Jesus, realizes that the plan he had, whatever it was, and people debate that till the cows come home, but whatever his plan was, hadn't quite worked out in the way he thought it would. He's been given 30 pieces of silver in order to betray Jesus. Now he's done it. Well, he doesn't want the money anymore. He takes it back to the religious leaders of the day and says, here, you have it. And they're like, no, we don't want it. And Judas throws it on the ground and walks away. He then goes and hangs himself. He's reached a dead end and he can't face the future. But you know, Judas's betrayal of Jesus was no worse than Peter's denial, was it? It was no worse than the way in which the other disciples deserted Jesus, the way they fell asleep when he asked them to stay awake, and the way they ran away when the guards came near. Judas was just like the others, wasn't he? He got it wrong. And isn't, as he takes the money back, an act of repentance? I mean, in Matthew's gospel, the word is even used to describe what he's trying to do there. And he walks away empty handed. It's a beautiful image of repentance, actually. And even the money is scooped up and used as something that brings good and as an act of grace. They can't take the money back into the temple treasury, so they use it to buy a burial field for foreigners, people for whom there's no other place to bury them. Judas's money is used for that. But you know, it really does grieve me that there is no John chapter 22. There should be. Judas had reached a dead end, just like Peter, just like the other disciples. His only mistake is to not hang around long enough in order for Jesus to come to him and to give him a new beginning. I wonder, you know, whether Judas's story finished just there. Sometimes I imagine as Christ dead descending into hell, as the spirit of life begins to awaken him, and Jesus with one hand grabs the thief who asked him to remember him when he comes into his kingdom. Jesus doesn't reach with the other hand and take Judas with him. That hand, which only hours before had reached out to Judas with bread and said, Judas, eat this in remembrance of me. Take it and eat. I wonder if that same hand doesn't reach out to Judas again. Did it happen? Well, I don't know. There is no John chapter 22 because we don't know what happened to Judas. But John, as he reaches the end of his gospel, does make it clear that he didn't write down everything that there was to write down. In fact, he said, you know, if I tried to do that, there wouldn't be enough room in the world for all the books that would be written. We don't have a John chapter 22 about Judas, the page is left blank. We just don't know. And so it is with us also, I guess. The invitation to us at the end of this gospel, as we've journeyed through these resurrection appearances, is to write John chapter 22 in and through our own lives. To allow Jesus to come near to us, to allow him to call us by our name, to allow him to deal with all of the things in our past, and to hear his words to us, follow me, and to journey with him into the future. This stuff really matters. When it goes wrong, we've seen the disastrous consequences of that in the life of Judas. So let's learn the lessons of these resurrection appearances. And whenever we feel like we've hit a dead end, know that there's always the possibility of a new beginning. That whenever we come to the end of something, because of Jesus, his victory over death, his vindication of all that he has proclaimed through his life and his death, through his resurrection, well, then new beginnings are possible. Where there's grief, there's a possibility of joy. Where there's fear, there's a possibility of peace. Where there's failure, there's a possibility of a different future. Where there are endings, there are beginnings. No John chapter 22, but it's waiting to be written. Will you allow God to write your future with him?